Hey guys, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
Hey guys, we're going to talk about something today. Yes, we've talked about it before, but you are not seeing the same thing again. We're talking about it again because it is so important. I'm going to just call this our chronic video series. We're going to talk about chronic inflammation. Guys, that's inflammation that is continuous. It's happening over and over and over and over. One of probably the main causes of it is sugar. We've got too much of it. Processed foods and stuff just keeps inflammation going. And diseases love chronic inflammation. It just helps them to proliferate like crazy. So if you don't want to get sick, or if you are, or if you're feeling sick, or if you think it runs in your family, which it probably might run in your family because you eat the same thing your grandma did, you've got those same habits, you probably ought to pay attention to this. Inflammation, chronic, is different than inflammation from an injury. Inflammation from an injury is quite necessary. Chronic inflammation is completely unnecessary. Dr. Hall has been studying this and studying this and studying this, and he has found more information to tell you, basically. If we repeat something, well, my gosh, it's because it's pretty necessary and you need to hear it again. How many times is somebody going to hear something to learn it now? On average?
Well, you hear different things, but 10 to 15 to 20, it depends on who you look at.
Yeah, and used to, when we didn't have as much chronic inflammation and cell phones and distractions, I think they say it was 5 to 7. So it appears that we are chronically having to hear things more often too, along with this chronic inflammation.
Well, yeah, and people, and sometimes just hearing, you just hear it, it's expressed just a little bit differently, and somehow it clicks with different people. Yeah, but you're going to hear a lot of the same stuff, but it's because we're dealing with the same old stuff, and sometimes we need to hear it over and over before it finally settles in and sinks in, and we need to do something about it. So anyway, so there's acute inflammation, which is good. It's part of the it's part of the immune response.
Is that why they say it's cute?
Yeah, it's cute. It's acute. Short term. Short. It should be short term. So in other words, you get a viral infection or whatever, and so you have inflammation or a wound. And so I mean, we've been into wound care for decades. So I always think about wounds usually, but certainly you get a viral infection or a bacterial infection or whatever, your immune system responds to that, and the inflammatory response is one of the first things it does. So, but let's say you have an injury, let's say you have a wound. Well, they used to say no inflammation, no healing. That's not true, but no inflammation, no optimal healing. So you want optimal wound healing. And it's interesting, I'll go to doctors' offices and they'll talk about, and we'll talk about products we've developed for wound care that are really, I'll just say that they're unsurpassed. They're the best out there. And they'll say, well, is it an anti-inflammatory? No, it's not. You don't want anti-inflammatory because that slows the healing process down. Is it antioxidant? No, it's not antioxidant because oxidative species are created and produced during the healing process to kill bacteria or whatever virus, but also to help grow new tissue. You don't want to use an antioxidant. But those two ideas are pervasive in medicine. But anyway, the idea is that inflammation is necessary for optimal healing. And one of the deals is when you have an injury, you're going to have it's not going to be a frank infection, but you're going to have a contamination. You just are. The bacteria, viruses everywhere. And so one of the first things the body does it needs to keep you alive. I mean, there's no reason to heal a wound if you're dead. So the body is going to do everything it can to keep you alive. So you have an acute immune response, acute inflammatory response. You have more blood to the area that's bringing oxygen and nutrients and immune cells and all kinds of good stuff to help fight infection and kill the bacteria and all that and keep you alive. And then once that's under control, then to get the wound healing process started.
And the inflammation naturally goes away.
And you want you want an acute inflammatory, the inflammatory phase, you want it to last 24 hours or so, 36 maybe, and then you want it to go away. But the body knows how to resolve inflammation naturally. The problem is we get in on the act and then we start screwing things up. And I know I'm using clinical terms. I shouldn't say screw up because that's so clinical, but.
I don't know, man. I think these people know what you're talking about.
Okay, all right, okay. So anyway, so the hallmark, there are 5 hallmarks of inflammation. So there's redness, there's swelling, there's pain, there's warmth, and then there's loss of function. And that we were basically taught the first 4, but loss of function is also there. Well, guess what causes the redness, the swelling, the warmth, and even really, those 3 are caused by the blood. You have increased blood supply, and that's the idea of inflammation: get more blood to the area that has all the good stuff in there to clear the infection or clear the contamination, prevent infection if you can, and then get the healing done. Pain happens to go along with it, and that's just part of it. Pain kind of serves a purpose to let us know something's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that way you don't keep doing it.
Yeah.
But protect it.
You know something's wrong, you got to take care of it and all that. So that goes with it too. But anyway, that's the idea. But you want a short inflammatory. If you have if you have a viral infection, you want inflammation. And really, we're kind of getting off track a little bit, but when you get the cold or a flu, you get the flu. It's not the virus that makes you feel bad. It's your immune response that makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
It's all that stuff that's being pumped into your bloodstream that makes you feel bad. It's part of the body fighting that infection.
And that is the acute inflammation.
That's acute inflammation.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
That's what we're designed for.
And so I always tell people, look, if you got the flu and you haven't really felt really bad,
that's not a good sign.
That's not necessarily a good sign, because you need to feel bad because that's the immune response. And as part of that is the inflammatory response. Right. And so it's interesting that our immune response that's working is what makes us feel bad, but that's just part of it.
That's right.
Part of the deal is we need to rest. And so that not feeling well puts us in bed sometimes.
Yeah, it makes us calm
down.
So
it's kind of a safety feature, really, but we don't like feeling bad, but hey, that's part of the price that we pay. But it's the immune response that makes us feel bad. It's not the virus.
So talk to us about chronic inflammation.
Now we have chronic
totally
inflammation.
The bad guys.
So we like acute inflammation.
It's cute.
Important.
I mean, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
It's cute. We like it.
Chronic inflammation, though, is pervasive, and I have it. Probably everybody has it, but
it's not cute, guys.
It's not chronic, and it's chronic systemic. Usually, it's just affecting the whole body, and there are a lot of factors involved. And oxidative, we talk about oxidative stress. Oxidative stress and inflammation are linked together. And so everybody, as we get older, we're dealing more and more with oxidative stress, reactive oxidative species, and nitrogen species too, by the way, but oxidative stress. And so we're all exposed to that as we get older. Foods contribute to that. The things we're exposed to contribute to that. And then just the things we're exposed to. We're exposed to more toxins and more junk than we ever have, ever in the history of mankind. And we've cleaned up some things, but there are just more things out there all the time. And then we always get around to our diet. Our diet's lousy. The Western diet's pathetic, let's just be honest, and it just is. The foods that taste good are bad for us as a general rule. And the sweet tasting foods, the sugars, the carbohydrates, the things we really like contribute to it. So
look, you said carbohydrate that caused a response to you.
Yeah. I couldn't have done that. But anyway, so there are a lot of things that contribute, but there are foods that are pro-inflammatory. So what can we do? I mean, we can't escape the environment. I mean, we're stuck.
Yeah.
These cell phones, and the government doesn't like to admit it, but we know that it doesn't have to be non-ionizing radiation, and we're exposed to. I saw the numbers, billions of times more of this stuff than we were even like 20 years ago, and that affects us. And then all the other stuff. So you can't escape it. We're here. this is the environment in which we find ourselves. We're surrounded by it, and that's just the way it is. So we have to do what we can to be as healthy as we can, knowing that we're stuck in this environment. So one of the things is try to eliminate or at least reduce the foods that are not good for us. And really, like, and when I talk about pro-inflammatory foods, it's the same foods that are, if it's bad for you, it's bad for you. It was, and I've said this before, when I was in dental school, it didn't, they were talking about foods that were generally bad for your teeth, usually.
Those are very similar to those.
And it didn't take me too long to figure out, hey, if the foods that are bad for your mouth, for your teeth and all that, are the foods that are bad for you.
Yep.
So it's real easy. If it's bad for you, it's bad for you. It's
From
bad
head to
for you
toe.
all over. Yep. And so pro-inflammatory foods, and so they're foods that they don't necessarily force you into inflammation, but they can certainly contribute to it and help us continue with an inflammatory state.
And a good place to start with that is foods that create an insulin response.
That's right.
An insulin spike. If you can limit those first, you've got a really good head start on this chronic inflammation.
Refined sugars and just the carbohydrates and all that increase the glucose in your blood, which causes a spike in insulin and all that. When you have increased glucose in your bloodstream, they don't necessarily know exactly why all the time, but they just know when we have increased sugar in our blood, we're going to have an increased inflammatory response. It's just the way it works. Some of it has to do it does enhance oxidative stress. Well, how does it do? We don't necessarily know exactly what's happening right down to the atomic level, but we do know that that's what's happening. So they're contributing to oxidative stress. Oxidative stress contributes to inflammation. Like I said, they're linked together. So refined processed sugars, refined carbohydrates, and all that. The high glycemic index, the spikes in the blood glucose, which causes increased insulin, but also it causes increased production of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, the interleukin-1, interleukin-6, the tumor necrosis factor alphas, and then you see the C-reactive proteins and some of the other things that they're looking at. That's what happens. You just see that. Saturated and trans fats. And, fats are not all necessarily bad for you, but some of them are bad for us, Some of those...
those man-made ones are the worst.
Yeah, exactly. And
margarines and stuff like that.
Yeah. And they can contribute to stimulating the production of these pro-inflammatory chemicals, these cytokines that we call them. And they can activate certain receptors, like toll-like receptors on immune cells that can cause systemic inflammation. And so that's part of the deal. I'm going to mention omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids have a bad reputation. And you go to the literature, it's going to say, well, they're pro-inflammatory, the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Well, the reality is omega-6s are also anti-inflammatory. And they're in the foods for a reason. And really, there are a lot of studies that have shown that omega-6, we need omega-6s, and we need like an 11 to, I've even seen 11 to 1 ratio, omega-6 to omega-3 is ideal.
Well, and I think the problem is a lot of it, we get too much of that, not enough of the 3.
Well, and that's the ratio's out, and all that. Part of the deal is they just made some assumptions. Omega-6 is involved in linolenic acid, and that started and you're talking in the prostaglandins, and which can contribute to inflammation. And they just assumed that omega-6s were producing a lot of that, when in reality they know that it's producing just a tiny bit. And studies have shown omega-6 is not. In fact, studies have shown the higher omega-6 that you take, the less chance you have of heart disease and all that. So omega-6s are good for you. It's just, but you go to the literature, 99 times out of 100, you're going to see omega-6s are generally bad, omega-3s are good. People are taking omega-3s from fish oil and all that. Studies have shown that's not good.
That's not the best source to get it from. That's not a good source at all.
And taking high doses is not good. So anyway, you're going to see that. But so What
We
you
learn all
find
the
in, what
time.
you find in plants,
Yeah.
the omega fatty acids that are found in plants
Natural.
are the best way, and they're going to be in a pretty good ratio.
Right.
They're going to have both 6 and 3s, and that's what we want. So we see a lot of sugar, high fructose corn syrup. We see a lot of things. Same thing, high glycemic index, stimulating the pro-inflammatory cytokines. Excessive alcohol is a problem anyway, but it does the same thing. Advanced glycation end products. You're going to see more about that when you fry foods, really at high temperatures and all that.
When you do that, you're changing the form of the fat too. You're altering the molecule.
Yeah. And glycation, there's glycosylation and there's glycation. Glycosylation, most proteins, for example, are glycosylated, which is an enzymatic process where sugars are added to proteins. There are a few proteins, insulin's one that doesn't have any sugar, but the vast majority of protein. When I took immunology in 1974, an antibody was defined as a protein. Well, now we know that it's a glycosylated protein. It's a glycoprotein. It's got sugars, and sugars are what doing most of the work. The protein kind of serves as the backbone, and the protein does, and the sugars are the muscle doing the work. You know?
Not to be confused with table sugar.
That's right.
Glucose.
No, there are like 200. There are
Different
200
sugar.
different sugars out there. The vast majority are not sweet, by the way.
Yep.
So, but they're sugars. Chemically, they're sugars, and they're important. And so, glycosylation is an important process. Glycation is a process that tends to be it's not normal. It's not healthy. That's the reason hemoglobin A1C is a glycated protein or hemoglobin. It's got some glucose attached to it, and you try to keep that down. Keep that down below 7 and all that. And they use it as a measure on how well you're doing and all that. But that's a glycated protein, and so that's not natural. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It just happens that way. And we do have, and as we get older, we have some glycated things, but we're getting a higher dose of it when we're eating some of these foods. That contributes to production of inflammatory cytokines and all that. And just various additives and preservatives and all that are a problem. So anyway, we know, just try to stay away from the carbohydrate. At least reduce them. You know, very few of us are going to eliminate carbohydrates from our diet. But we need to significantly reduce them and things like that. So the pro-inflammatory foods. Well, there are anti-inflammatory foods, but before I get into that, let me talk about some of the anti-inflammatory drugs and how they work. Specifically, the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Aspirin was the first one, but ibuprofen is a big one, naproxen, and all those. Ibuprofen or Advil is a big one. Those, and like most drugs, they do one thing. They're targeted to one thing, and what they do is they're COX-2 inhibitors. COX, cyclooxygenase, is an enzyme, and there's cyclooxygenase 1, cyclooxygenase 2. Aspirin kind of hits both of them. Ibuprofen tends to hit COX-2. They're involved in making prostaglandins, which are mediators of inflammation and pain. So they're lipids, they're fats, okay? And so we target those because when we can get the inflammation down, then that can help with the pain and all that. So they're doing one thing, but the problem is that they're inhibiting the wound healing process because prostaglandins are also involved in repairing tissue and growing new tissue. So they're involved in inflammatory response and killing bacteria and all that, but they're also involved in growing new tissue, just like the reactive oxygen species, the nitric oxide, the superoxide anion, and peroxides and all that are secreted in tiny amounts by the macrophage and others during wound healing to kill bacteria. But later on, they also help grow new blood vessels and tissues. And so some of these things do the same. They have multiple jobs, you know. Prostaglandins are important, like I said, in growing new tissue and wound healing. Well, when we're taking NSAIDs, we're inhibiting the healing process. Now they know that NSAIDs are toxic, and they use the term toxic to the wound healing process.
When I saw a study that they calculate that it does by at least 30% slow the healing process.
Yeah, and
by 30%, that's a lot.
that's
It's going to take 10 days.
because the longer you take to
Yeah.
heal a wound, the greater the chance you're
Yeah.
going to get an infection or something. I have problems and all that. So, wound healing is really important, and that's slowing it down. Things you can do to speed it up too, so it gets even bigger when you do that. But anyway, so that's basically how the NSAIDs work. They're working against a specific enzyme. They're doing one thing. They're doing it really well, but it's causing problems. Besides the other side effects, blowing holes in your stomach and causing bleeding. Ibuprofen is hard on the kidneys over time. It can do damage to the kidneys. So can aspirin. It's not quite as bad, but aspirin's really bad about blowing holes in your stomach and all that, and so and causing bleeding. So you want to be careful with those. Anti-inflammatory foods. And this is the thing about foods. Drugs tend to force the issue, for one thing. We tend to use drugs to make the body either do something it wasn't necessarily designed to do, or to stop doing something that it should be doing. Like when we take antacids, the stomach's supposed to produce hydrochloric acid. I mean, that's part of its job, but we tell it to stop doing that. Or we're given anti-inflammatories to stop the inflammatory process, when that's part of the deal,
Yeah.
Foods have multiple targets. They were designed to hit all kinds of different things in a natural way, the way the body was designed to, and that's what's great about foods. So so there's one basic mechanism for anti-inflammatory drugs. What are the mechanisms of the anti-inflammatory foods? Well, one is they do modulate inflammatory pathways, so they can modulate or help control the signaling pathways. So the chemicals that are involved in all that are secreted by the white blood cells, for example, that go out to the tissues and to other white blood cells and tell them what to do, they help modulate that and keep that under control in a normal way. They can inhibit the activation of transcription factors. So we're talking nuclear stuff now. We're talking about DNA and that kind of things. Nuclear factor kappa B is one. So that's one of the things that foods can do. They can inhibit pro-inflammatory mediators. So like curcumin, which is real popular from turmeric. It can inhibit the activity. Guess what? It can inhibit the activity of cyclooxygenases, COX-2. Just like ibuprofen, but it's not stopping it. It can help control it and inhibit it some.
Make sure it
but
doesn't get out of control.
It keeps it under control.
Make sure it doesn't have a chronic
It's not
situation going
telling
on.
it, no more, you can't do this, stop, and that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yep.
So it can do some of the same things. They can help. So there are antioxidant foods, and we talked about them. So when you reduce oxidative stress always involved in inflammation. One of the main things that the antioxidant foods do is, that the anti-inflammatory foods do, is their antioxidant effect. So that's one of the main ways that so many of the anti-inflammatory foods work, is they help control oxidative stress. And they can regulate other parts of the immune response, like vitamin D can help regulate the immune cell activity, so the white blood cells, it can help regulate that and suppress excessive inflammation. They're not stopping it, but they're help keeping it under control. And another big one, we talk about gut health all the time, the microbial populations of the intestines, the GI tract, the gut microbiota, which is super important. I mean, now we understand basically all health goes back to the gut.
Yeah.
Hippocrates said,
I've got a gut feeling you're right.
Yeah, you're right. They even know about the gut feeling now. The gut feeling, it's a whole different part of the nervous system is in the gut, enteric nervous system. And that's a different story. We might talk about that some other time.
Sounds good to
Probably
me.
should, in fact.
Yep.
Because it's fascinating. But the Hippocrates said over 2,000 years ago, all disease starts in the gut. Well, that's just about right. And really, I could say, you could say that all health starts in the gut. Because I mean, it controls the brain health, and I say control, it just about controls it, but it's involved in everything. So, and it's the bacterial populations that's doing most of it. So when you control and when you help keep those bacterial populations healthy and in balance and all that, that is huge, because when you get them out of balance, the first thing that happens is you get an immune response, you get inflammation. The gut barrier is breached and all that. You're getting things getting into the bloodstream that shouldn't, and then you start getting chronic inflammation. And so keeping the GI tract healthy and the bacterial populations healthy is super important, and that's what so many of these foods do. They help feed, so they act as some of them are probiotic. They have bacteria in them, like sauerkraut and others, but the prebiotics. The probiotics are foods or supplements that actually have the bacteria in them. Prebiotics are the foods that
feed the
bacteria use. So like the fibers, the soluble fibers, and
like the kraut part of the sauerkraut.
The kraut part.
Yeah, it gets soured by those bacteria.
Yeah, right. The kraut part.
Yeah.
So it's actually both. It's a probiotic and a prebiotic. But anyway, prebiotics are really important, and if you just get good prebiotics in your system, the bacterial populations will start getting back to normal and all that. Bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that are, boy, you read more about them, they're so important. And they're just real small. I mean, they're like 2, 3, or 4 chains. You know, acetate or propionate or butyrate are the 3 big, most important ones, and they're like 2 carbons, 3 carbons, 4 carbons. So they're little molecules, but they are really big at everything and protecting the gut barrier, but also they have anti-inflammatory effects. So the short chain fatty acids that the bacteria produce, just one of the things they do to help with keeping inflammation under control. Then foods can also modulate the epigenetic process, and we've talked about epigenetics before. We always thought that DNA was the big deal, and it is the big deal. It's a big deal, but epigenetics, we now know that so much in the environment, including food, can actually control or at least influence how genes are expressed.
That's the epi part of the genetic.
You know, and I mean, we never knew that. We never would have dreamed that, ever. We never would have dreamed that, but now we know that's true. We just thought, hey, it's DNA, and whatever the DNA says, that's it. No, the DNA is subject to all kinds of effects.
I've said this before. My grandma and my great aunt are identical twins.
Yeah.
They have the same DNA. But the epigenetic part, the life part, my grandmother, she died of cancer at 60 something. My aunt never got any cancer, lived to be 90 almost.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a prime example of genetics versus epigenetics.
I'm an identical twin, and my twin brother, when we were little, he 5 or 6 or 7, somewhere along there, he got hay fever and asthma, and I mean, he was sick. He was really, really sick. And I mean, I just kind of shot up and left him and all that. We finally got him to an allergist and all that, started getting those shots when he was about 10 years old, and he caught up to me. But I mean, we grew up in the same house. We slept in the same bedroom. But when we were in kindergarten, he went in one classroom, I went in another, and we were exposed to different things. That's all I can think of. But anyway,
the point is, we're genetically better snatched.
Genetically, yeah.
Teacher did. That had to be.
Genetically, we're the same, but somehow, different things affected us differently, and that's epigenetics. But anyway, foods can help modulate the epigenetic processes in how genes are expressed, including genes that are related to the inflammatory process. So anyway, chronic inflammation is involved in systemic inflammation. Basically, is involved in all chronic diseases. If you have a chronic disease, you can just about guarantee that
Chronic inflammation is
chronic and oxidative stress too, for that matter. And again, they're all linked together. They're both linked together. But even you look up a list of inflammatory diseases, you'll find cancer. Cancer, I mean, all the autoimmune diseases, besides the things that we think about as inflammation, remember itis means inflammation. So you have arthritis of the joints, you can have dermatitis.
Of the skin.
Yeah, you can have, and then you can have the
Pancreatitis.
yeah, pancreatitis, yeah, and so all those, but also just so many other diseases, that all the chronic diseases, basically, if you have a chronic disease, inflammation is a part of that process. And so one of the things you can do to help, to some extent, is to try to get inflammation under control. That means stop eating the bad foods, start eating the good foods that can help.
And I mean, look at it like, how much does it mean to you that you get better?
Yeah.
I mean, if it means enough, you can completely quit.
Yeah.
It's just how much does it mean to you, really?
That's right.
Yep.
So anyway, it's important to know that. And so, I mean, people can take this information, do with it what they will. But anyway, they've got the information now. So the foods that taste really good that we know that are bad for us, generally they're bad for inflammation. They just are. The foods that are good for us, they tend to be anti-inflammatory. And so they're going to help and all that. So that's really a pretty simple thing. It's not like we have to go to the fast food place and eat there. We do because it's convenient, but we don't have to. It takes a little effort to eat healthy.
That's right.
And all, but it's worth it.
That's right.
And it can be done. And certainly you can reduce one and increase the other and get into a better balance.
It's going to help regardless.
It's going to help.
It's going to help regardless.
Yeah.
That's right. Guys, we hope you've gotten a lot out of this. And if you've made it this far in this video, then we wish you even more health. But if you didn't, well, you didn't hear me say that anyways. So, but hey guys, we hope that this helped you. We do understand we've talked about inflammation a lot lately. Guys, that's because that's how important it is. Chronic inflammation is bad. Acute inflammation is necessary and good. Guys, do what you can to be healthy. One thing I wanted to point out, Dr. Hall said 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates said that all disease comes from the gut. Guys, that is human nature to this day. It always has been to look at the negative side of things. Disease being negative. Guys, if disease comes from the gut, then the lack thereof comes from a healthy gut. Look at it like that. Why not be healthy? Why not do your best, be your best? Try and make your gut as healthy as possible. Because if disease comes from an unhealthy gut, then the lack thereof has to come from a healthy gut. Mm-hmm. That's just the good and the bad. Mm-hmm. So look at that. If you made it this far, that's the extra bonus little kick you got there that nobody else did. Hey guys, start something in the comments. Talk about this. How are you feeling? Have you incorporated some better eating habits in your diet? Let's get the comments going. Get a good conversation going there. We'll be checking in, seeing how you guys like this. Remember, like and subscribe to this video. We'll see you next time. I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
And this is For the Health of It.